So if you have a will, congratulations. You've done the right thing, but don't pat yourself on the back because you're not quite done yet. Nicole Ewing is here to tell us what you might want to review and revise your will several times during your life. It just might save your heirs from being disinherited. She's Vice President, Business Succession Advisor, and Tax and Estate Planner at TD Wealth. That's a long title, Nicole. You must be very important. You're doing lots of good things over here. Let me start off. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I can't hear very well, so I might need to have questions repeated.
Okay, no problem. I can do that. Let's just start off, if we could, about, you've got a story about, because you deal with a lot of people who have had issues with maybe not taking care of the will the way they should. So give us one story of, I think it was a gentleman in Nova Scotia.
Right, and this is a really extreme example of what can go wrong. So individual marries a woman he's known for 14 months. And his will was in existence, and it provided for the estate to pass to his adult child from another marriage. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks after he was married, he passed away. And because in the province that he was in, marriage voids a will, his will did not take effect. An intestacy resulted, and his new spouse inherited the majority of his estate, rather than it going to his adult child as he had intended.
I think there's a lot of people who just kind of got a shiver when they heard that, and I know that's, again, it's so unfortunate when the will doesn't reflect your wishes, or sorry, what happens doesn't reflect your wishes. I mean, that's the ultimate. You've got a list here in terms of the kinds of times we should review the will. I want to bring it up. We've got basically marriage, children, grandchildren, death of spouse, a separate executor for your business assets, outliving your heirs, change in your financial circumstances, and when you change your mind. These are times to review your will. Let's start with the first one. We just talked about it. You said, marriage, children, grandchildren. What about a common law situation? How does that affect your will?
Well, it doesn't, and that's a big surprise to a lot of people. So in most provinces, for example, the common law spouse does not have property rights. And so if you have an existing will, unless you update that will for your spouse, for your common law spouse, they won't have an entitlement to your estate if something happens to you.
What about, I know one thing for a lot of people is they'll look when they're filling out their forms at a company and they've got their RSPs, and they have a beneficiary, and then of course they've got a will, and you hope they say the same things, but what if they don't, and what happens then?
Well, and RSPs, the designations are a really critical area, and depending on how the clause in your will is drafted, it may not actually deal with the RSPs that you have in place at the time of your death. So if you've drafted a will and you've addressed the RSP accounts that you have, and after the fact you either acquire new RSPs or they are converted to RIFs, for example, that designation may not apply. Another thing is, depending on the language, there's some out-of-date language that appears in a lot of wills that may inadvertently revoke beneficiary designations. In addition to revoking previous wills, for example, it might revoke those designations that the people think they have in place. So really important to make sure you're double-checking and making sure that those up-to-date beneficiary designations are what you think they are.
Great point. I know the second point we have here, and I just want to keep on moving because I want to make sure we get to some of the big ones, but basically if you own a business, you need a business executor for that. I'm going to just move on to the next one, Nicole. What if you're 30 and you're making your will? What are the things you need to think about in terms of maybe your heirs, maybe you outlive your heirs?
Well, and I think the best drafted wills are those that contemplate future what-ifs, and we want to make sure that we're thinking about, okay, what if our executors die? What if our beneficiaries die before us? For example, in an executor situation, if I've named somebody and they actually pass away while they're administering my estate, their executor becomes my executor unless I've specified something different. So we want to make sure that who you think is going to be the executor is the person that you've named, and you're thinking not only now, but maybe 10, 15 years from now. Similarly, with your the beneficiaries that you name, depending on how that clause exists, if that person passes away before you, if your will is drafted in one way, their share is going to go to their heirs, perhaps their spouse, or it will go as though that gift was never made. So we want to think about if the beneficiary dies before you, if an executor dies before you, has your will contemplated that and provided for an alternative?
Nicole, I've only got about 20 seconds, but I do want to touch on one about your financial situation changing. Can you tell us about the situation where you might have something written about your RSP, but not your RIF? And again, I've only got about 10 seconds.
Right, so the beneficiary, if you put your RSP in place and you convert it to a RIF, that is not the same beneficiary designation. And so we want to make sure that the designation that you have in place for your RIF is actually dealing with your RIF and not your previous RSP that you may have had in place.
I can guarantee people's jaw dropped when they actually heard you say that right now. Nicole, we'll get you back to talk about the rest. Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks, Kim.
Nicole Ewing joined us from Ottawa. She is Vice President, Business Succession Advisor and Tax and Estate Planner at TD Wealth.